Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Today, we're giving a state a little bit of love that we haven't been to in quite a while, right? As far as a guest goes.
Yeah.
Talking about old Georgia, baby. Got Georgia on my mind. Today, we got Jonah Abraham and Andrew Foster on. How you guys doing?
Good, man. How you doing?
Wonderful.
Doing real good. Real good. I'm glad to be talking about Georgia, man. Georgia is near and dear to my heart. I love the state of Georgia.
Yeah, as an Auburn fan, Andrew knows Georgia's their daddy.
No,
so
oh my
gosh. When Auburn plays Georgia, I'm like, go Dogs, but I'm an Alabama fan.
Bro.
So SEC championship's gonna be something different this year. But
I don't want to talk about football for the next year. Look, life is hard for Auburn fans right now, people. I mean, it's hard. They get your hope up and then they just freaking hurt you. But anyways.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I quit worrying about football. My wife, she's a huge Georgia fan. Like every Saturday, she's like, "You gonna be home to watch the Georgia game?" And I'm like, "Probably not. I'll probably be in the woods." She just knows what to expect now, so it's like I don't care about football as much. It takes up too much time for deer hunting. So.
That's how I am, dude. I used to be a much bigger football fan than I am now, but like even I went to Auburn and I didn't even go to a single game when I was a student in Auburn, just because like I'm hunting. But we had some friends come into town for the Iron Bowl and everything, and so she was like, "Oh, let's go to that." I was like, "Okay, I'll take the afternoon off. It's gonna be kind of warm anyways." Man, oh my gosh, I was like, I should have just freaking went hunting. This is why I don't watch football anymore. Anyways, where were we?
I get so distracted.
You're just totally derailed.
I love it. No, I love it.
Hey, football has a profound impact, though.
On hunting pressure.
On hunting pressure.
Yeah.
There was somebody, Bama lost their first game of the season against Texas, and I saw someone post on Facebook, they were like, y'all better hope and pray that Alabama does not lose another game, because if they do, the WMAs are going to be slam-packed every Saturday. Ain't nobody going to be at home watching football anymore. It's going to be like back in 07, bro, when Bama sucked.
Yeah, that's the thing that sucks for y'all too. Is like your rut is so late in the year that football season is pretty much over by then, so you don't really see that benefit. Like for us, when Georgia's games are going real good, it's always like during the prime time of our rut and stuff, and so I can always say like, "Hey, Georgia's playing at 3:30. There's not going to be hardly anybody in the woods this afternoon. I can go wherever I want." So it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, we should do a whole podcast about strategizing around college football.
Hey, that's how you can check on hunting pressure for sure.
Yeah, bro. No, it's like, hey man, if Tennessee's having a real good year, maybe you should go hunt Tennessee that year. That fall. If they're ranked.
Yeah. When does Tennessee play Alabama? That's the weekend you should go hunt.
That's the weekend you should go hunt in Tennessee. There you go.
Awesome. Well, guys, appreciate y'all joining us. Fun little intro so far. Hopefully the listeners and viewers are enjoying it. But I am excited to kind of talk to you guys. Y'all have had one hell of a season so far, by the way. Okay, because I know I've been friends with Andrew for a little while on Facebook. It was like y'all were going back to back with deer, dude. It's like one of y'all would kill one, the other one would kill one. I'm like, what is going on here, man?
So I'm always trying to play catch up, and I can't let him have the spotlight for too very long.
Yeah, so. It's super weird. So like this year, 2021 we killed a really big deer together in the tree, and then we always hunt together. I probably hunt with Andrew more than I do with anybody else. And this year I killed that deer on public, and then the very next morning he killed that big 6 that he killed. So and then on this last one I shot it and I called him. Like he's always one of the first guys I call in the tree whenever I shoot one, right after I usually call my dad first. But I called him and he's like, well, that means tomorrow I'm going to kill one, so I better get ready to go get in the woods. And sure enough, it actually happened. I was like, what the heck is going on? we need to keep this going.
No, that's awesome. Well, I want to kind of get into a little bit more of y'all's background. So, Jonah, I want to start with you. Give me a little bit of your background when it came to hunting public land. Like, did you always grow up doing that, or is this something that kind of came later on in life for you?
So, I did it a little bit as a younger kid. Me and my dad always hunted. We spent tons of time out in the woods, from the time I was probably like 6, 7 years old. He was taking me out. We usually had like a lease down in Greene County, Georgia. We would go down there and spend the weekend, on the 4-wheeler, hunting ladder stands, that kind of stuff. And as I got older, we would venture out onto like some quota hunts for public land. He had a friend that was pretty big into like public land hunting back then. So, we would venture out a little bit, go hunt some public land here and there. But really what it boiled down to for me is like, when I was like 17, 18 years old, I was in a lease and just got tired of like going to the same place every single weekend to go hunt, and I knew the whole property like the back of my hand. I knew there really wasn't like that many big deer running around there. And I just felt like I was bored with it. And I felt like I was going to get bored with hunting in general if I just kept doing that. And like I would eventually just get out of it and find a different hobby. So when I was like 20-ish years old, I killed my first deer on public. And then from then on, I just kind of started saying like, hey, I'm going to try to learn how to do this a little bit more. And my dad, he never really was real big on public land. So like he didn't know any spots or any WMAs that were, specifically good or anything like that. So I just kind of figured it out on my own. So I would say probably about 6 years now, it's been kind of like my primary focus is public land hunting. And that's where I got the idea for a Georgia Public Project. Is just something that I wanted to kind of start documenting my journey on that and try to figure out like, hey, if anybody can do it, if I can do it, anybody can do it, right? Like it's people are scared of public land because they're like, oh, there's going to be so many people out there and all that kind of stuff. Like around here, I can go to probably 80% of my spots at any given time, and there's never a truck parked there because you just have to get a little bit creative in terms of your access and that kind of stuff, and just look for different things than what everybody else is looking for. And I would say that hunting and hunting clubs and stuff growing up, you kind of learn what the typical deer hunter looks for when they're going deer hunting, right? You learn like, oh, there's a grain field back there. Like most likely somebody's going to be back there, or there's a big piece of private ag that backs up to it. Like most likely there's going to be people hunting that if it's within a reasonable walking distance and stuff like that. So that's kind of my background, how I got started on public land hunting, and plan on keep going because I really enjoy it, man. It's an adventure for sure.
Yeah, and Jonah, I can relate with you a lot because my upbringing was similar to yours. I was hunting mostly with my uncles growing up, but it's like we'd always hunt the same little farm, like 80 acres, or maybe go to one of their leases. And it was like you kind of knew after a while, like okay, like there's nothing really here. Like you kind of know the property like the back of your hand. But there was no like adventure with it, and I was like, man, I know there's a ton of public, fairly close to where I live, and like, when I got into college, that's when I started doing that and struggled, dude. I mean, got my teeth kicked in for like 2 years, and finally killed some deer, and then been on, kind of off and on a roll with it since then. But yeah, that's kind of interesting now, and just like the relatability aspect, because I think a lot of people that listen to the show can kind of relate with that. Just, maybe they get tired of that little piece of property they had. They don't want to spend the money to go get in a big hunting club or a lease or something like that. So, public's their next best option. I can't talk today, dude. I do a podcast and I can't even talk. Andrew, let me ask you, dude. I want to ask you the same question. What is your background when it comes to public land? Is it similar to Jonathan, or did you do something a little bit different with how you approach starting to hunt public land?
It's pretty well the same. I just never dived in quite as deep as he did. I grew up when I shot my first deer when I was 8 years old, sitting in my dad's lap on a hunting lease that we grew up hunting, and I was in it till I was probably 18. Real similar to Jonah, that just hunted the same piece of property over and over and knew pretty much every corner and knew where everybody was, what every little piece of the property was. And the same thing, just getting bored with it. And just, there was decent deer, but then again, I've seen big deer ruin friendships that should have never been ruined, I guess. But just wanting to venture out and find different areas and more or less the adventure aspect of it. But as soon as I was able to drive 16, 17 years old, being able to go out and do my own thing, I started doing that, and then also started doing a little bit of door knocking in the suburbs. So mine is kind of split between public land and a little bit of suburban hunting both. So I'm not quite as hard as Jonah is on the WMA hunting, but I like it just as much because there's plenty of adventures to be found. You just got to go get them.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Well, to kind of give a background a little bit more about you guys, y'all are coming from what I would call more of a northern part of the state. Start getting a lot more hill country, more mountainous country, stuff like that, which me and Andrew can relate quite a bit with. That's kind of like our habitat we like to hunt, is a lot more of that hill country, starting into some steeper stuff. At least because you can find it and read topo maps so well, but you can find these transitions pretty easily in a lot of stuff if you know what you're looking for. And when we were talking before we actually started recording, I think y'all were both kind of talking a lot about kind of like the transition aspect. I know, Andrew, you were, but Jonah, you kind of were as well. When it comes to like y'all's approach to public land, maybe actually before we even get to that, Jonah, specifically for you, when you started, you said you've been doing this for 6, 7 years now. What was some of the biggest hurdles you had to overcome early on hunting public land that maybe you weren't prepared for, or necessarily you weren't thinking was going to be such an issue for you compared to like how you're hunting your leases and your hunting clubs, kind of as a younger kid?
I would say probably some of the biggest hurdles are, number one, just dealing with how many hunters are out there at certain times. Like, you think oh, I've got 30,000 acres to work with. Like I can go a lot of places and not see anybody. But you get out there on Saturday, whether it be opening day of bow season or opening day of gun season, whatever it is, there's going to be a lot of people out there. And so I remember like the first time I ever went on a piece of public by myself on like an opening of a gun hunt. I was just like mind blown. I was like, there's nowhere to park. Like where am I supposed to park? Where am I supposed to go? And I think I literally spent that entire day just driving around trying to figure out where to even park. And were you with me that day? No, this was a long time ago. But it's just one of those things that like, learning the pressure, and then, certain WMAs are going to get more pressure than other. Like there's a lot of national forest not too far from my house. That stuff gets no pressure because people don't think there's any deer out there. And yeah, the deer density is like super low. You might go sit like 3 or 4 times in any given spot where there's a ton of sign, and you might not see a deer, maybe one deer, 2 deer, something like that. So there's super low deer density, but there's a lot to explore out there. And then another hurdle I would say is just trying to deal with like people. Like this is actually, I kind of had an example of this past weekend. People that don't follow the rules, I guess, and you're doing everything you can to follow the everything they have in the reg book in terms of staying, within the regs on public land. And then people just go out there. You put all this hard work scouting, all this kind of stuff, trying to find deer, and then somebody's out there hunting when they're not even allowed to be out there, right? And there's not enough DNR people around here to work the areas to keep them out, so that people can just get away with it and they can just go, hunt wherever they want, whenever they want. So that was another challenge. Like I've had pictures over the years on trail cameras and stuff of people like RWMAs. It's a little bit different than you guys in Alabama. Like you guys will have most of your WMAs are open for archery throughout the whole season, right?
Yep.
And then you have specific rifle hunts, right? Well, ours, we have archery up until like maybe October 15th, and then it closes completely to all hunters. And then they'll have like a youth hunt, and then they'll have rifle hunts spread out like 2 or 3 weeks apart throughout November and December. So, and you can't just go hunt out there with a bow whenever you want to. Like it's closed to rifle. And this is not all WMAs, but it's closed to all hunting outside those dates. So if you're inside those 3 days, the 3 days of the rifle hunt, you can go hunt anytime with any weapon, whatever. But if you're outside those dates, it's completely closed to hunting. Well, people just come out here and go hunting, and they don't really realize that that's the case, and they think they can just go hunt out there anytime. So that happens a lot. And then as far as the national forest goes, it just follows the state season, so you can pretty much go out there whenever you want as long as deer season is open. So that's pretty cool, and you see a whole lot less pressure out there as well. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, and, I mean, because that's one thing that Georgia's always confused me on those regs, because like how everything, first off, how early bow season closes, and then you're like, no more bow hunting.
What do I do now?
Yeah, you're like, no more bow hunting. And now you just have like muzzleloader or, rifle, hunts when they come up. Or it might just be closing and it's a quota, gun hunts and muzzleloader hunts for the rest of the year. And I'm like, that's a little frustrating, especially if you live close to one of those. You only have, like a month of good hunting, and then that's it.
Super frustrating. Yeah. It's like, because usually by the time the end of the bow season rolls around, that's when the hunt starts getting good. The deer are starting to move more and that kind of stuff. And, you're starting to get something figured out. Like this year, I had a bachelor group of 4 bucks, and one of them was a really nice buck, and I was getting them figured out. I was hunting the area. I was jumping around to different points and stuff in the area, trying to figure out exactly where they were traveling. And it was maybe like a 600-700 acre area that I knew they were kind of hanging out in. And I mean, just as the bow season was closing down, all the bucks split and the movement got really good. Like the day before, I had a really good encounter with the big 8-pointer that I was chasing out of that bachelor group. So I knew where he was bedding at that time because I was right against a thick transition of bedding, knew where he was bedding at that time, and that was the very last evening of the hunt. So after that, I had to give it a 2-week break. And then by that time, there had been a bunch of youth hunters in there, and then you have the first rifle hunt. And then, by that time, obviously patterns change, all that kind of stuff. So you pretty much restart next year on that deer if he makes it,
God, yeah, that sounds tough. And Georgia, over the years that I've hunted it, because I've hunted it several years now, man, Georgia's got some pressure, man. I ain't gonna lie. Even in the bow season, back when I've hunted a couple different WMAs across the state, and man, like people get after it. Even this September when we were up there
during the week,
it's like a Tuesday afternoon, and I'm like truck, truck. There's two guys walking down the road, truck.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't work around here.
Dude, it's impressive, man. And the gun hunt. One time I drew a quota gun hunt, and I'm like, this is it. Like, because this is a place I was familiar with. We had some good deer out there, and I was like, yeah, this gun hunt's gonna be it. But it's like a 3,000-4,000 acre parcel, and they draw like 200 something gun tags or something like that, like hundreds of gun tags. And dude, I got out there, and like you mentioned earlier, I was like, where do I even park? I mean, it was like the road. You would look down. There's like a long straightaway on the road, and every 100 yards there's a truck on one side, and then you go 100 yards, there's a truck on the other side, and then a truck. And it was like, dude, where do I even go here? And then of course you got all your flag and tape and everything. But you bring up a really interesting point also about the gun hunts and how it's staggered, and it's like, okay, you got this weekend, now you can't hunt it again for like 3 weeks or whatever. And you said you kind of have to start over on that deer next year. Can you go into that a little bit more about how you're basically disrupting whatever information you have on that deer at any given moment, and so by the next time you go in, you're having to like restart?
Yeah, so this is actually something me and Andrew were kind of talking about a little bit before we started, before you guys came on, we started talking. So I used to be like, probably my first 3 or 4 years of like religiously hunting public land, I was running a ton of cameras and, trying to use camera data to figure out where deer were at and stuff. And it eventually got me super frustrated because of that exact reason. Like you get a deer figured out, you got him daylighting on camera, and then you can't even go in there and hunt, right? So you're just watching him on camera, basically. It's like National Geographic or whatever. You can't do anything about it. And then by the time you can do something about it, the deer has changed patterns or somebody's pressured in there and changed his pattern, whatever. So I just quit running cameras almost completely on public now, just because I don't like to let the camera make my decision of where I need to hunt versus the sign, because like back a couple of years ago, I would get pictures of, let's just say a really big deer that I got pictures of. Like last year, I had pictures of a really nice deer that was probably way above the average deer that you would see on that WMA. And I'm talking about like 160-inch deer, probably like a really big deer. And I got like 2 or 3 pictures of him, and that completely changed my entire season because I spent the rest of my season trying to figure that deer out and trying to figure out where he was. And I'm not saying he wasn't in that area. I talked to this other old dude that was hunting in there with me, and we kind of started communicating back and forth. And he had the deer in the area he was hunting. He watched him cross the road. Like, I mean, we were in the right area, but I just never could really figure him out. And I spent my whole season chasing that one deer, and then I killed one decent little deer last year, but that was it. But so it's going back to your question, Andrew, of the gun hunts being so spread out. Like, really what I do is, now that I've built up some historical data, especially on the one WMA that I hunt a lot, built up some historical data, is I know which gun hunt is going to be best in which area. So like this WMA that we hunt has a few different tracks to it. So trying not to give away too much information. So has a few different tracks on it, and the deer will be in different patterns on those different tracks during those different hunts. So like you might have the deer on the first hunt is the end of October, right? And that's the one that I killed the deer on this last year. End of October is the first hunt, and that's when the deer on the most southern tract of the property are really starting to rut and kind of have interest in does and that kind of stuff. And then if you go up on the northern part of the WMA, you're not really seeing any of that stuff until later in the season. And so I'll try to kind of pick an area that I have historic data on, whether it be from cameras or just from scouting or whatever, and that's where I'm going to go during that hunt. And then I'm going to try to pick out one area, and that's where I'm going to kind of spend that entire hunt. If I can be there and there's not a lot of pressure in that area, and I'm the one putting the pressure on the area, then I'm going to hunt that area for that whole entire hunt and probably just bounce around within that area. I usually pick like a 500 to 700 acre area that I'll try to bounce around in throughout one of those gun hunts. But sometimes I will get like a wild hair and just go try a new area because I like to go look and see new woods, right? Like, again, I get very bored with an area like super fast. Like if I'm not seeing deer within the first like 2 hunts, I'm probably going to move on. And even though I know that's probably detrimental to me sometimes in terms of killing a big deer, It's just the way I am. Like I think I'm ADHD a little bit.
And Andrew, are you the same way with that?
More or less, but not so hard up. I'm constantly moving. And I seem like I don't try to nitpick an area. Like he said, he could kind of hone into one track of the WMA being better deer in one specific hunt. I'm always trying to move and just necessarily find sign and more or less hunting the sign throughout whatever it is. And I may be at the top side the first afternoon or the first morning. In the afternoon, I may be at the very bottom of the WMA and completely opposite of what Jonah does.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the sign reading and stuff. But I really want to, before we move on, talk more about the annual patterns and getting history with spots, because we're at the time of year where there's a lot of people in Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Louisiana, I think as well, where maybe your rut hadn't happened yet. We're just now getting into the rut, and some of the places that we hunt is just now starting to get good. And I put that in our Arkansas video that's going to be coming out, where I shot that buck, and I was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm just getting started. It's like November 18th or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I'm just getting started, dude. We hunt like this is the first rut. But anyways,
Yeah.
like people are just now getting into it, or even if maybe your rut's already passed, you can still go out and basically gather data on like late season deer, whatever they're doing at this time, and that's going to be really valuable for next year. So what is your thought on that? What's your game plan if you're trying to gather maybe historical data where you're like, hey, this time next year this deer's in big trouble because I'm going to be ready. I know what to do. I know where to be. What's your process there?
So I'm really going to try to figure out. I'm going to try to. I want to actually lay eyes on a deer. So like, if I have a target buck that I'm after, I want to be, whether I can get a shot at him or not. I want to lay eyes on the deer before I decide to like really hone in and try to figure that deer out. Because around here, these deer in our area will kind of rut from beginning of December all the way until I've seen them chasing does in January still. So it's like a very long trickle rut. You never really see like a defined 7 day, like, chasing phase, seeking phase. You don't really see that here. It's kind of like a very long rut. So, you might see a deer that comes from nowhere. Like, for example, that deer that I killed last Sunday, I don't run any cameras. That's a piece of private that I have access to that I don't run any cameras on. But that one spot, I can go there every single year on the same exact date or within the same week. And I know that I'm going to see a big deer cruising the edge of that mountain laurel when the thermals are rising coming up to the top of that hill, because it's a giant mountain laurel patch. The sun nails it and the thermals start rising, and it's every single year. I've seen 3 shooters out of that same tree, and this year was the first time I've been able to actually execute and kill one. But I've seen 3 shooters out of the same tree within the same week every year. And then the week that in 2021, me and him killed a buck on that, not that same tree, but very close to that area. We were hunting together and we killed a really nice, actually the one right, you can't really see it, but it's the one straight above me right here. It's like a 140-inch 8-pointer that we killed out of that tree. And so just like it's around here, they become predictable to a point with their rut within certain areas. So like once you learn that area, right? Like you have 1, maybe 2 years of experience in that area, and you're like, okay, I know for sure that these deer are chasing and they're running hard right now. You can almost bet money that the very next year they're going to be doing the same thing, because obviously the does come into the heat about the same time, all that kind of stuff. So that's in my opinion probably one of the best tactics that I have. So for me, the week before Thanksgiving that's the week that I'm going to spend every single day possible in a tree, because that's been a very good week for me.
Man, the audio listeners couldn't see it, but me and Jake were just nudging each other because you said the word laurel thicket and cruising bucks.
I got chills.
One of the reasons we were late getting on here is because we wasted an hour this morning looking at OnX about this hunt we got coming up. We're like, oh my gosh, big old mountain laurel thicket, big draw going up through it. Anyways,
Real quick, hold on.
Okay,
I got questions about that spot. How does that spot set up, like with that laurel thicket? Is it like does bedding in that laurel thicket, and like how does like the area set up?
So let me kind of paint a picture for you. So you go, it's the top of a very big ridge. There's a big saddle, and on the east, no, hang on. On the north side, I'm not looking at a map right now, so I'm not sure, but on the north, it's the north facing side where all the laurel's growing, right? And so on the north side, you have the huge laurel thicket that wraps around the entire ridge, and you got a big saddle right in the middle of it. Every single year, if you go down that saddle, if I follow down that saddle down that drainage, there's a big creek bottom down there. And every year there's a big scrape right at the base of that, at that laurel thicket at the bottom. Well, every year what happens is those bucks, as soon as like 9 o'clock hits in the morning, the sun starts hitting the side of that ridge, thermals start rising. And it's only, I've hunted up there on windy days, and you don't get the same action. It's only when they can rely on the thermals for the scent. And so whenever you go and the thermals start rising up that hill, you'll get a buck comes cruising up out of that drainage, and then he'll come cruise either whichever way the wind's blowing to be able to scent check the rest of that laurel thicket. And I mean, it's like clockwork every single year. This one, I mean, this year he did the exact same thing. He came straight up out of the laurel thicket, and he went actually away from me. And if you guys go watch the video, I was able to grunt him and rattle him back, and he came, within 20 yards of me. But he was going away from me, and I could tell he was like really looking for a doe. So I doe bleeded real quick, grunted a couple times, rattled my antlers together for like 10, 15 seconds, and then that was all it wrote. And he came right back to me like 3 minutes later. So,
Man, you're gonna have to send me the link to that. I'll link it down in the description so people can go watch that video. But man, that sounds pretty good. What were the coordinates of that spot?
yeah. You gotta be careful. I might give them to you. Andrew will tell you I'm a little too friendly sometimes with spots.
Hey, me and you are just alike then. Jacob's over here. He'll be like, he'll say the most random stuff. Like in Arkansas, we were hunting around cottonwood trees. He's like, I just don't know if we should talk about cottonwoods. They don't grow everywhere. I'm like, cottonwoods grow from like South Dakota to the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I might figure it out though.
Oh, dude. So
That's funny.
He probably just cringed when I said the word cottonwood again. Man,
I was had one of my friends call me before I told him we were going to be recording with y'all, and he was like, "Just be careful what you say, man." He's like, "Don't be giving away all of our good spots to people." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit too friendly with my words sometimes."
Yeah,
you about to get so blown up with messages on Facebook and Instagram. I want to stay on the annual pattern thing for just a minute.
Dang, I want to go back to mountain lore. Okay.
Well, Andrew, are you big on the on annual patterns, or do you jump around so much that it doesn't apply as well?
Not the majority of what I do. No, I've got one or two places that's strictly in the suburbs that plays a big factor in. But when I'm bouncing around on public land, I more or less, I don't know the annual patterns nowhere near like Jonah does, but I'm usually trying to hunt the hunting pressure, if that makes sense. Trying to find, I look on the map and find the most obvious places, saddles and transitions and all that, and lay several pins out, and then dive into the middle of those center pins and let people around me determine kind of what the deer do, and kind of letting people push deer around. I like to hunt the obvious places like everybody does, but growing up in the hunting clubs, knowing that people's going to be sitting on the food plot, sitting on the saddles, sitting on the transitions, the creek crossings. When I'm on WMAs and public land, I know a lot of folks are doing that same thing. So I go and check those areas. And if it's don't have a whole lot of pressure, I will hunt those areas. But I like to hunt the hunting pressure, basically. I like to find where the majority of folks are and not necessarily get in amongst them. But if I know people are pushing deer around where I think from one spot to the next, I'll be sitting in the middle of that in the least obvious places usually.
Okay. You want to go back to the mountain?
No. We can get sidetracked because I've got now more questions for Andrew. So Andrew, on that specifically, we'll come back to the mountain laurel. I'm not leaving that unturned. But Andrew, with you talking about like the hunting pressure, we've done a little bit of that as well, and like we've had guests on the podcast, like Wes Moe. We talk about using like what he calls a wolf pack tactic, where you're kind of doing that like yourself, like with a group of buddies, like get 4, 5, 6 guys, and you strategically place everybody in an area that, if there's deer anywhere in that general area, one dude's going to bump them to the next guy, and someone's going to have a shot opportunity if there's like, buck and some hot does in the area. Now with you, how much of that do you find by driving roads and figuring out, first off, like where people are typically parking at, and then also trying to correlate potentially where guys are parking at to potentially where they're walking into to kind of figure out where you should kind of get either on the back side of them or kind of get in the middle of that pressure where deer are going to get kind of pushed towards you?
Yeah, usually a big majority of it is driving around, finding out where people are parked. I'll spend the first hour and a half of daylight when most folks are there an hour before daylight, trying to get in the woods. I'll wait till it breaks daylight, find out where everybody is parked at, and then also in correlation to the maps of, hey, this truck's parked here, I think they're going to sit this saddle, or there's 2 trucks parked here, they may be sitting this drainage in this transition here. A a lot of places we go have got a lot of roads all the way around. So if there's 2 or 3 trucks parked on one place and I think they're going to a certain spot, I can circle around to the backside of it and push in. Or if I know that this morning there was a ton of people here parked at this place, I'll go in at midday, and then knowing that most likely they're coming back in that afternoon, hoping that they're going to be pushing deer around me as they're coming back to set up that afternoon.
Got you. Now, also, do you take wind direction into consideration for those kind of spots? Like, if a lot of guys are kind of setting up, walking into the wind, like, would you come in with a crosswind or wind at your back to try to get in one of those spots? You've got to come around from the backside.
Yeah, I usually try to keep the wind in my face the majority of the time, just when I'm walking. But at the same time, Jonah makes a lot of fun of me. My wife washes my camouflage in like ocean breeze, my normal whatever we wash normal clothes in. I'm not big on scent control, but as far as playing the wind, I'll go the majority of the way with whatever the wind's doing. But when I get the last few hundred yards of where I know I want to be, I try to set up my access, come in with the wind in my face or just a crosswind to where I'm trying to go. And then knowing that somebody may be sitting up 500-600 yards to the east of me, their wind bumping from where they're pushing back through a bedding thicket and sitting on the backside of that to where my wind's blowing out, but then they got that person's wind blowing through the bedding thicket, bumping deer to me, however.
Awesome. Let me ask, can you give us an example of a hunt where like you've had that success doing something like that, where like kind of like the whole game plan of where you've like, found the pressure, thought of where they were potentially at, and you kind of went in the back door and had some kind of success, whether you killed a deer or just had an encounter, but something you can kind of break down for the listeners.
I've got a very vivid memory of a really, really big deer that I should have killed, but I didn't. Back in the day, it was supposed to be 4 points or better, and now they've switched it to 4 points or better or 15 inches wide on a lot of places here. But before they swapped it, it was 4 points or better on one side, and I never could confirm that the deer for sure had 4 points. It was either a ginormous 6, it may have been a 7, but I didn't shoot because I wasn't sure. But along the road, there was probably 5, 6, 7, 8 different people parked along the road, and I went way past everybody else, knowing pretty much the general area they should be hunting. And I probably did a 1.5 mile loop down behind everybody, walking up a big creek, straight to the middle of a creek, and got up on the backside of a thicket on a transition, probably an hour after daylight, and waited till seen that deer probably 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
After most people started getting out of the woods, going to eat lunch, however, and I think most of those folks getting out of the woods to leave had started bumping deer around. But I tried to get on the backside of everybody, and I slipped just up the middle of a creek, just walking real slow until I got to where I knew folks were probably, again, 500, 600, 700 yards, maybe 200-300 yards away from me. And when they started bumping deer, I had a really, really nice deer. I just never could confirm exactly what he was. Come straight out of the edge of the transition of a really super thick bedding, coming back down the creek that I had walked up from where all the people had been set up above me on the main part of the road. So yeah, that was one. It haunts my nightmares for sure.
We all have some of those stories, man. No, that's pretty cool. Now, do you ever? Let me ask, Andrew. Do you ever do this? Like, will you ever go out? Like, say, give example, talking about gun hunting here. There's a 3-day window, for example. There's a gun hunt. You go out day one. Do you typically see the pressure every single day in the same spots? Where, like, it's one of those things, like, if you kind of see people in the same areas over and over again, you're like, I can guess they're going to do the same thing tomorrow morning, so you'll go in before daylight and try to get in one of the spots to kind of get that first pressure push, like, right around daylight?
Yep. It usually, if the first day, it's 80% of the pressure is going to be in the same general core area. People may be sitting different trees, but they're sitting the same 200-300 yard circle. And it, give or take. But yeah, usually, generally, if I can do that the first whole day, even the afternoon, all the way through the day, riding around finding pressure, the next 2 days of the hunt is generally going to be the same pressure in that same general area. So I know if I make it there an hour and a half before daylight, I can push way in past where they're going, and I don't have to make that 1.5 mile loop around the backside of them.
Gotcha.
But yeah, if I can the first day figure out where they are, it's generally going to be the same pressure throughout the entire hunt.
Let me ask you this: will you strategically park in a place that allows for other parking around you, or something like that? Or like, will you not park in a parking area and go a little bit further down the road to intentionally let somebody park there, but you're walking way past them?
Yep. And even if that's only 200 yards down, and you know that there's a pull off that you can tell is well beaten down, and you know that somebody 9 times out of 10 throughout the hunt is going to be parked there, I'll leave that parking spot open and go pull off just the edge of the road to where it's not necessarily, hey, this is a parking spot, but enough you can pull off and people can get by you.
Well, I'd say that's one thing we never do is we hardly ever use like parking areas, right? Like where there's somebody, because that's where you can almost go in the woods and see the people trails like you can deer
Yep.
trails, and you're like, okay, here's where this guy's going to his spot every time. This guy, so that's like I would say that's something we try to stay away from completely, is just using those quote unquote parking areas, try to make our own parking areas, or whatever it is, just park on the side of the road. Like that's one thing I'll say about Georgia that I don't understand. Like we have a friend that's from Michigan, and he said that public land up there, like on the really busy days, you'll go and there's trucks just parked back to back all up and down the road. Like the parking areas be full, but then also everybody's just going in the woods. In Georgia, everybody goes to the parking area. I don't really know why that is. I guess they feel like they have to go to the parking area or whatever, but like you don't really see a lot of trucks just parked on the random side of a road going in somewhere. So that really honestly leaves a lot of spots open that I have a lot of spots where I'll go park on the side of the road, and I never really have to worry about like getting there early because somebody else is parked there or whatever. Because there's just you don't see many people doing that.
I think
But hopefully
I think there's a mindset there that if you go to the end where that road, especially if it's like a dead end and there's a parking area, like I'm already the farthest back in here. Now I can walk back further. Versus if you like parked, 600 yards away from that parking area, maybe there's like the road's a little bit closer, there's a bend in the road or something like that. But like because people just mindset is I'm gonna try to drive the furthest I can, park in the farthest spot, and then kind of walk in the woods. They may only go in the woods a couple hundred yards, or maybe they go in a mile, but they're trying to go to that one parking area and then try to punch in further. And kind of probably like where you guys are at, a lot of pieces of public that we hunt in Alabama, it's hard to get away from people. Like we've talked about this in the podcast. Like if you walk more than there's some areas you can get farther away, but if you walk more than a mile and a half, you might not hit like a drivable road, but you're going to hit a gated road. You're going to hit a logging road. You're hitting another access point that somebody could be walking up and down. So it's almost like you're doing more harm than good in a lot of those spots where like if you are truly trying to walk a straight line direction more than a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles, you're getting back into hunting pressure at that point.
Let me throw a little thing out there too about this. I love OnX. Like I've always religiously used OnX, and in terms of user friendliness, like it's the easiest app to use in my opinion in terms of like quickly locating spots that you want to go look at. But I started using in conjunction with OnX the CalTopo app, and it's free, and they have basically LiDAR maps on there for free that you can go look at, and that has prevented me so many times over the past 2 years of walking in somewhere where OnX does not show any road beds or anything like that, and that you would never see coming in from a different access point, and then walking in on somebody else hunting that you're like, how the heck did this person get in here? Because I'm the only one parked up there. But then just come to find out that if you look on CalTopo, you can see a road bed that comes directly from another parking lot into that spot. I don't know. I think it's just when they logged areas and stuff like that, they just made cut throughs and that kind of stuff that came through from different roads. And so, CalTopo has been a huge factor in terms of, for me, just finding areas that have less access points. And the less access points you can find, the better, in my opinion, because that way you don't have to worry about people funneling in from every direction. I'm kind of the opposite of Andrew. Like I look for areas with as least amount of people as possible. He'll go look for areas with a lot of people. So it's two different kind of tactics there, but they both work. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's one of the reasons I'm glad to have you guys on, because we can kind of go back and forth between the two different styles, because it both works for you guys. That's the cool thing. It both works. Is just that's the cool thing about hunting in general, just whitetail hunting in general. Like we could have one guy on this week that just give an example because this is most cut and dry. Absolute believes in stick control. Okay. Believes in it wholeheartedly. He's got his own evidence for proof of it. Then we have a guy on next week that's like, that is like, Tom Brownlee.
Oh, yeah.
What is he? Not a professor. He's a pro-junk. How do you say that? Professor, Mississippi State, adjunct professor at Montana State University, who does canine work, and he's like, "There's nothing on the market that's gonna 100% eliminate human odor. Like we've tested everything with dogs, and a deer has a better nose than a dog does." And it's like, and he's a big deer hunter or whatever. But it's like you can have these guys that all have different perspectives of what works for them, and they're all successful. Like typically, if we got you on the podcast, because you're successful in some light or the other. So little hats off to you guys. Y'all made it to the podcast. But everybody has like different styles, but it all can work as long as you have something that you truly believe in, that also you have like confidence in what you're doing. Because where we have the most listener success stories is when a guy listens, or man or woman, whatever, listens to the podcast, they find one guest that they really connect with. Okay, maybe it's because the area they live, the hunting style, whatever, and they'll listen to all these other episodes, but they really take what this person says as pretty much the gospel, and they go and apply it, and they build confidence in it, and then they have success doing so. Those are the people that I think really build the confidence and figure out a style that works for them. It's the ones that when you really go around and you try to use everything that everybody says, and you're constantly jumping around doing different things, that you never build confidence in what you're doing, and you always struggle because of that. And again, case in point with you guys, y'all both have different styles, but you're both confident in what you do, and it works for you guys, which is perfect.
Yeah, and I think what builds a hunter, over the course of their career or whatever you want to call it, is experiences, right? So like you'll try something, doesn't work. You try something again, doesn't work. Then you go try a different tactic and you have success, right? Then you hold on to that forever. Like you'll hold on to that next year, the year after, and you kind of start molding that into your own like habits or patterns, whatever you want to call it, and it becomes your own tactic over time because you modify it from what you tried the first time, and it keeps getting better and stuff like that. So I think that is what builds a person. Is you've got to go out there and get those experiences just to learn what your habits and your patterns and your style, your hunting style is, right? Like over the last few years, I've really tried to start picking up ground hunting, and I really enjoy it, but I haven't got good at it yet. I haven't killed a deer from the ground yet. And then I'll go in and get in a tree, and that's when I usually kill my deer because I know what I'm doing, and I know, hey, this is the tree I need to be in. But I've gotten some great encounters on the ground, but I haven't killed one on the ground yet. But I really want to get better at that because I really enjoy that style of hunting. It's just like days like this when the leaves sound like you're walking through like a bunch of chip bags. It's impossible to really be good at it. But yeah, I think, apply like some different tactics that I've tried to apply on that is like listen to you guys' podcasts with different cadences when you walk and stuff like that, but you just have to pick up on different things and try it. And that's really what makes a hunter, right?
No, for sure, no doubt. And kind of comes back to both of you guys having like different styles, but it kind of works. Is like, the one thing that's a commonality between you guys is like the habitat. Y'all hunt a lot of the same kind of grounds, public grounds and stuff like that. And there's a commonality between. It's not like y'all are completely different parts of the state hunting completely different areas. That those styles are, built around the areas that you hunt. Y'all both hunt a lot of the same areas, but again, have different styles, which I want to go back to the actual like more hunting aspect with you guys. I've heard, Andrew, you mentioned a lot about sign specifically, like finding certain kind of sign that you really like to key in on. And Andrew, I want to ask you this, and Jonah, kind of, get your take on it. What kind of sign tells you in an area that it's worth your time spent there, especially if you are looking for a certain quality of buck, or just deer hunting in general? What do you really need to see in the area that kind of keys you in on it? Like, hey, I need to spend a little more time here. Even though I'm going to bounce around, this area right here definitely deserves some time and some looking over and some time spent there.
Right. Historical rubs is a big thing for me. And even if they're not freshened up this year, if you can tell a tree's been hit 3, 4, 5 years in a row, especially on some of these public lands that get hammered, those deer are using that area year after year after year. That, and if I can find rub lines and scrapes is a big thing for me. But I'm not like a lot of folks, because I know if I can find that scrape, there's other guys that's going to find that scrape and it's going to be hunting that scrape. So pushing past that, or either following those backwards into bedding, however, and getting on the backside of all that. But for me, historical rubs is a big telltale sign of knowing that I'm in the general core area of where I want to be. Even if they haven't, like I said, haven't been hit this year, I know that year after year, deer have been using this general core area, and then using that to my advantage in the way I set up.
I got a question real quick. How can you tell that a rub has been hit 4 or 5 years in a row?
Good question.
The way I look at it, if you tell a deer's hit a rub this year, it's going to be shavings on the ground. You can tell it's just been kind of just almost shaved. Somebody took a machete and just shaved it up and down the tree. Historical rubs, when they've been hit over and over, you can tell where they've been rubbed and tine marks in amongst it. But the tree every year seems like it's trying to grow around it, but the deer rub it so often that it doesn't have the opportunity to fully grow around itself. And you can tell just from the tine marks and the way the tree's trying to grow back around itself through, I guess, the springtime when the deer ain't rubbing. They're trying to grow around where they typically rub on the tree itself. And you can just, the way, I guess, it just grows around itself. And it's been hit year after year after year, if that makes sense.
That is a really good way of putting it.
Also, I'll say this. So cedar specifically.
Oh, yeah.
So I used to always write off, like, unless it's a super fresh rub, if I found like a cedar that had a big scar on the side of it, I'm like, I don't know if that's a rub. Well, when we had gone up to Arkansas to drop off a lot of trail cameras, there's a few cedars in a couple different areas, and one of them, this little row of cedars, had like huge rubs in it last year. And we went back in to go pull a camera that was still in that spot, and when we went in there, those old rubs look like what I found in the past that I would always write off as old rubs. Okay, and what I mean by that is like a cedar. One thing I realized, because this is the first time I've actually seen the rub the year before, seen what it looked like, how tore up and orange and yellow it was, and then go back in the next year and see the exact same rub again and see what it looked like, 300 plus days later. And it was just completely scarred up. There was no bark growing on that side of the tree. Like it was just nothing but just like the solid wood, and then the bark kind of grew around it. But you looked at it, it just looked like the tree was scarred up. But like there was not a way, if you didn't know previously, that hey, that's an old rub. But then I start going through the woods and you start seeing those everywhere. And some of them, you could see have been hit year over year. Like the whole side around that tree up to 3.5 feet off the ground, 4 feet off the ground looked like that. And that tree's just getting hit every single year. Then others, you just find one where that scar was only on one side of the tree and then it hadn't been hit again in ever how long. But that was really eye-opening for me, just seeing what it looked like on cedars. And then I guess you look at some other different species of trees. Some of them may scar more or less than others. And that's a really good analogy, what you're talking about, Andrew, where it's like, that tree's trying to grow around that scarring. Because what that is, when the deer is rubbing that tree, it's scarring the tree. It's damaging the tree, and the tree's trying to heal itself. And if they continue to open it up, it's like you can kind of almost see like where that, like you said, the tree's trying to grow around that scarring, but it never gets the chance to because the bucks continue to hit it.
Yep. And usually if you can find those historical rubs like that, somewhere in the vicinity, you're going to find fresh rubs and scrapes and all that. But if I can find a fresh rub from this year that's only been hit once, that deer may be a mile away by the time I find that rub. But if you can find that historical rubs that's been hit year after year that has been hit, and the way they're growing like that, that that's the general core area that they like to use. So
that's what I was going to ask you. What and you just mentioned like it's probably his core area, but I was going to ask you just like based off the historical rubs and fresh rubs being there, what does that tell you about different times of the season? Like whether or not you're finding that kind of earlier in bow season versus that pre-rut time period. How do you analyze that from like a hunting standpoint?
If I find it early season, it's not necessarily. I hunt it more during the rut, I guess, when bucks are marking territory. And if it's hard to say if you find a tree that's not opened up fresh and you can just tell it's a historical rub, it's hard to say whether or not that was early season when they're rubbing velvet versus market territory closer to the rut. But usually if I can, like I said, if I can find those historical rubs, there's going to be more rubs in the vicinity of that area that's freshened up. And if I can find that, especially early season, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it because deer will be rubbing velvet off and don't mean a whole lot. But if you can find that close towards the rut, deer marking their territory, and marking their area, then again, they're in that vicinity that time of year, especially just marking their general core area around the rut. They're using that area a lot more than they would typically, I guess, early season, just rubbing velvet off.
Now, okay, also with that, are you actually, if you find that sign, because all you talked about is rubs, you haven't really mentioned scrapes at all. I don't know, does scrapes play a factor for you at all other than like a scrape line?
Yep. Scrapes more to me. I hunt scrapes more I do on private property versus public. Because usually, like I said, if I can find a scrape on public in that general window that we're hunting at 3, 4, 5 days, if I'm hunting around other people, they're typically going to find that same scrape and there's going to be somebody set up within a couple hundred yards of it. But I know if I can find all the other sign plus the scrapes, that you're in a really good hot zone. So that goes back into trying to find the transitions, and where I normally set up is I got to find all those key components together.
Okay, so now go back to the rubs though. Talk about these same kind of hunts. You're getting into the rut, you're finding a bunch of these rubs, fresh rubs in and around historical rubs. Are you sitting on those rubs, or are you just kind of focusing on that area and you're trying to find where's the best thick cover that these deer probably going to be kind of tucked up in and that a buck's going to be kind of, scent checking? What's your thought process there from like an actual hunting standpoint or a scouting further standpoint in that general area?
Yeah, when I find those and I find the historical rubs, and then you can find the fresh rubs around it. A lot of times, especially around here, depending on the way, like it's really mountainous around us. If you can find trails that's going from the bottom of a creek bottom up to the top of a ridge, a lot of those usually, if you can find a fresh rub, you can find a rub line itself, and that rub line will lead back into bedding areas or thick cover that the deer will dive. When people start pushing in, those deer will dive into those thick areas that they know they can get away in a lot easier and a lot less seen. And I like to sit on the edge of those transitions to where the rub lines, I can usually see them. I'm not necessarily sitting right on top of them, but I like to be able to see them so I can monitor them in a sense. But to where I think the deer are coming from, basically bedding straight into those areas that they're using going into feed to other areas, however.
Awesome. Jonah, what's your thought on some of this, specific buck sign that we're talking about here? Does any of that play a factor for you?
Like I used to get really tore up when I'd find like a big rub or a big scrape or something. Like you get all fired up, and I still do. Like I still all the time, like, oh, dude, this is super exciting. But
No, he don't. He'll walk right past it.
yeah, now I use it mostly like I use it almost, I guess, almost as like how I used to use trail cameras in terms of now I know there's a buck here, right? So like, let me get like now it's time to get serious, right? Like, okay, I found some good sign. Let me get serious about figuring out where the deer coming from, all that kind of stuff. So I'll kind of use that to say like, all right, let's just say you find a big hub of sign. Like there's a bunch of rubs in here. There's a couple of scrapes on the edge, whatever. And for us, it's always easy to find the scrapes because there might be scattered beech trees in the woods, and you can pretty much say, "Hey, I'm gonna go look at that beech tree or that holly bush," and there's probably gonna be a scrape on either one of those. You don't really have to like wander around the woods trying to find where the scrapes are. They're usually either under a beech tree or a holly bush, and so if you can find one of those two things, you're probably gonna find a big scrape there. So then I'll start using that to like look at my map, and I'll say, okay, what's the closest thing that looks like it would be good bedding on the map? And then I'll head that direction, or maybe try to follow the sign out towards that direction. And I'll probably try to hunt between the sign and the bedding. Maybe if I can find some type of pinch, or whether it be some type of terrain feature, whether a saddle or a bench or something like that on the side of a ridge. I basically just use sign as like something to tell me, hey, there's deer here, but I usually don't hunt directly over it.
Okay, gotcha. And do you have any questions on sign? Because Andrew's a big scrape guy.
Well, so yeah, I'm a big scrape, but I found it interesting how you were talking about not wanting to rely on trail cameras, because I've had a little bit of success with that this year. Like kind of, I think it is kind of like what your tactic is, which is where I ran a bunch of cameras in a certain area over the summertime, located some bucks that I definitely wanted to get a crack at, and then ended up pulling all those cameras so we could put them in Arkansas, and then basically that kind of forced me to ease into that area and use my woodsmanship to locate the buck sign and try to figure out where to kill these things. And I mean, we dang near went 3 for 3 on 3 hunts, getting a crack at one of our target bucks after that. So I want to go a little bit deeper on the sign reading aspect, and how do you know that you're in the spot? Once you leave your trail cameras, you're talking about not getting necessarily so tore up on buck sign, but like when it comes to reading the sign and it's game time and it's time to like go in there and actually kill something, what are you looking for? What's your thought process?
So let me kind of refer this back to a hunt I actually did yesterday morning. I went and hunted some national forest close to the house that I had some history with last year that I jumped a buck out of during this past week. So I knew there was probably going to be a buck hanging around in there. And there was a lot of sign in there, a lot of scrapes. And I actually ran a camera in there last year. So I go in there yesterday morning. And this year, I'll say another big tactic that I've been kind of using that I feel like is kind of giving me some success is I don't think I've walked in the woods one time this year with a headlight. Like I pretty much just waited until gray light breaks and then walk in the woods, whether I'm toting a gun or a bow. Like I'm just waiting until gray light breaks because I want to see everything I'm looking at on the way in. I also want to know if I jump a deer, because if I jump a deer, in my opinion, that's probably the biggest sign of where you need to hunt over everything. No, I don't care what you find. If you jump a deer out of a spot, that's exactly where I want to set up, or somewhere within where I can see that spot. If there was a deer bedded there, or if there was a deer standing there feeding, for some reason that deer was there. So I want to get right in a tree somewhere right in there. So I want to know when I jump a deer and where it was. And so yesterday I walk in, I'm walking down this old road bed. As I'm walking in, the leaves were like super loud, and I hear something get up about 150 yards away. It wasn't quite daylight enough for me to like see everything in the woods. I could see, but I couldn't like see a deer walking 100 yards through the woods unless it had its tail up, like waving it or whatever. So I heard something get up and start walking down the ridge. So I stopped, and I don't think it was like running away from me because it just got up and walked. And it got up. It sounded like it was almost laying on the roadbed. And I know for sure it was a deer because it just had that perfect cadence that a deer always does when they're walking. So it stood up and then walked down the ridge, and it was going down the ridge that I was planning on going to hunt down. So I get over there to where it was, and there's a blowdown in the road bed, and up above it, there's this old, that cane grass, you know what I'm talking about, that grows up here in the mountains. That's another thing that I always try to, kind of focus in. If I see a lot of cane grass, those deer love to hang out in that stuff for some reason. I'm not sure really why that is, but it's something that I've always noticed. So there's a big patch of pecan grass above this big blowdown. So I circled around the blowdown, and there was a big bed in the middle of that cane grass looking down onto the roadbed. And this roadbed doesn't get a lot of pressure like this. It's not like one of those roadbeds that's going to be somebody walking down it every day, but it gets enough pressure to where I think a deer knows, like, hey, if I'm going to be in here, I need to keep an eye on that roadbed. And so I think what it was is I think that deer did see me coming in or hear me and got up and walked down the ridge. So I continued on what I wanted to do throughout the morning. I wanted to get back to that spot where I jumped a deer last year and I was going to get set up in a tree. Well, I'm going down the ridge, and like as soon as I get maybe 100 yards down the ridge, there's a big scrape right there. And it had a holly bush. It was under a holly bush, and it had a little holly branch laying in the scrape where he had just broke it off and just worked it, probably the night before, I would say. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm going to keep pushing. And the way the leaves were kicked out of the scrape, I could tell he was kind of headed, if he stayed in that direction, he was headed down the hill. So I worked down the hill. There's another big scrape at the bottom of the hill. I walked on past that, and I kept going past to the spot where I wanted to hunt because I had it in my mind that that's where I jumped the deer last year and I needed to be in there. And I don't know what I jumped. Like I know it was a buck, but I don't know how big it was. I just saw like a rack as he was kind of running away through the thick stuff. But so I get back there. There's two scrapes on the saddle that I wanted to hunt, but they're both pretty old, like full of leaves and stuff. Not really been worked in the last probably week or two. So I get up in the tree anyways, spend like 2 hours in the tree, and I'm like, all right, I'm wasting my time. I'm gonna get down. So I get down back out of the tree, go back, walk back the same way, but I kind of circled around below the scrapes where I was upwind of them. And just in case he was in that area, working the scrapes, I get up to the scrape that's real close to where his bed was, or I think it was his bed. And that holly branch is kicked out of it, like something had worked it. So he came back in, and I don't know if he thought I was another deer or what, but he came back in and worked that scrape again after I had walked by it. So that was pretty interesting to me. I was trying to figure out like what that means, but I'm definitely gonna get back in there probably tomorrow morning and try to hunt him again. And I don't think I'm gonna go past that first scrape this time.
Nice. I got to ask, you were mentioning that you don't like to walk in with a headlamp because you kind of want to see where you're at. Is that only if you're walking into a newer area, or is that
No, I
the
tried to do that.
same?
Actually, that area that I killed that big deer on public, the first one I killed at the end of October, that's an area that I've hunted for the past 3 years. And I've been in there, like I know it like the back of my hand. I could probably walk in there in the dark without a headlight and get to the tree I want to be in. But actually, I went to a little bit of a different spot that morning. But I do it really anywhere because, in my opinion, like you never know like what could happen, especially if I'm toting a gun, because I'd hate to walk in the dark and blow a deer out that I never had a chance at, when if I could have blew him out while I have a gun in my hand, I could probably shoot him if he stops, 50, 75 yards away. So it's just something I've changed. Like I've always grew up, and I think we all did. We all grew up with going in the woods with a headlight on and, marching through the woods with your 700 lumen headlight, bright, lighting up everything, in the woods. But it's something I'm trying to change about my mindset, and I think it helps. You know what I mean? Because you at least get to see you also deal with a little bit of like FOMO, like fear of missing out. Is you're going to miss that first 10, 15, 20 minutes of daylight in the tree, and you're like freaking out, like, man, that's when I need to be in the tree. But then I go back and think, like, how many deer have I actually seen the first crack of daylight? And it's actually pretty rare. Like I hardly ever see, I don't know about you guys, but I hardly ever see a deer at the crack of daylight. It may be different for you, but
It's hit or miss.
yeah, I mean, I think I can count on one hand how many shooter bucks I've seen at the crack of daylight, throughout my entire hunting life.
Well, if you're gonna say shooter bucks, then yeah, it's usually an hour after daylight.
Yeah.
I've seen deer at the crack of daylight, but I don't think I've ever
Yeah.
seen big bucks until an hour after it's gotten daylight or
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But that's just something I've been trying to change, tactic that I've been trying to do different this year, and I think it helps. I know for sure, like I'm losing that FOMO feeling as I go through the season. Like I don't feel like I'm missing out anymore. I feel like I'm doing the right thing by waiting and to go in the woods, just because I feel like I've had more opportunities. And who knows, you might jump a deer that was bedded somewhere or with a hot doe or whatever, and then you just get in a tree right there instead of going all the way where you had planned in your map, right? You stop right there. And I will say this year too, like I've learned a big lesson of on public, you can see big deer like 100 yards from your truck. And, a lot of times like my mindset on public has been for my the whole time I've ever been hunting it is like go deep and try to get away from people. But this year I walked into a spot and that's where I found that bachelor group of like $4 early season. They were like literally 150 yards off the road, staying in this little thicket that you could literally see from the road as you're driving through it. But they were coming in it from the back side to where they would never be on the front side, visible to the road during the daylight. But if you got right on the backside, all of a sudden there was big scrapes popping up back there and big rubs and all that kind of stuff. And it was super, super steep too, which is, I think, a big factor of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, like I want to go a lot deeper on a lot of this, so we're gonna have to like break y'all up and get y'all each on a separate podcast.
Yeah.
And each of y'all get your own podcast. Andrew, one thing I was wondering about with you, and I think we mentioned this a little bit before we got started, but it was the fact that, like with your strategy, you're constantly trying to balance, basically avoiding hunting pressure or setting up for hunting pressure, but while also setting up on the right transitions and terrain features and stuff like that. And so it kind of sounds like this interesting mix where it's like maybe you're not going to the best stuff, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier where you're picking like the best looking saddles and whatever and putting pins on them and then kind of getting in between all of that. So like I'm curious if you look at a map and you're like, oh my gosh, here's a nice ridge that goes up and there's this awesome saddle and there's a thermal hub right there. Are you just drawing an X to that spot because you're like someone's definitely hunting that? I need to set up in some weird way to catch the pressure or whatever. Like what is your thought process there?
To an extent, it depends a lot on the hunting pressure that I find first and foremost. But like Jonah said, a lot of times, and I feel nowadays you got a lot of guys that's trying to go a mile, 2 miles deep. Everybody wants to go deep to get away from the hunting pressure. That's kind of been the mindset here the last few years, especially around us. So sometimes I can put an X on that spot in the saddle, but I can also go, say that saddle's 500 yards from the road, a mile from the road. I can go a half mile towards that. And people's going to be pushing way past that. And I know that saddle, wherever it is, people's going to be trying to push into that saddle and pushing farther to getting away from the hunting pressure. But if I know people are parked in that general core area, and like Jonah alluded to earlier, where you see the normal parking spots, if you walk where those normal parking spots are, you can see the human trails that go straight down off the parking spots. And if you can get away from that there, let's see, if you can go, talk about a saddle, it just kind of it all determines on the pressure it's there during that hunt, because a lot of these hunts are only 3 days. I'm not opposed to hunting them necessarily per se, but if I know they're getting pressure, I usually will put an X on it. But if it's somewhere I know the area, I'm trying to put myself in a position where I think the deer's coming from towards that saddle that somebody's going to be hunting, and get in between where that deer's coming from and I know somebody's most likely sitting.
Okay, that makes sense. So I mean, it's like a game time decision every single time, then based on the pressure that you're seeing.
A lot of times, yeah.
Okay, interesting. And when you are setting up, let's say that all the good looking terrain features or whatever is taken up. Are you just looking for any terrain feature on the edge of that you think is going to funnel deer that are being bumped by those people?
Yeah, a lot of times, even if that's 150 yards from the truck, I don't mind sitting to where I can see the truck if I'm 150, 200 yards from the truck. And I think the deer's moving between the truck and where the people are. And when they go to get ready to get down, if they're pushing back through a bedding thicket, I don't mind sitting right next to the truck. Just like you said, wherever I think most of the pressure is kind of funneling deer along transitions to back through the bedding, or even pinch points in between ridges, or the way the land sets up. If I don't mind less obvious saddles that a lot of people will pass by to go to a more obvious spot, that I think if people's pushing deer, they're going to be pushing them straight back through that small saddle that gets overlooked. Always trying to put myself in a position of where I think the deer are basically getting bumped from and going to, and getting in between.
Yeah,
and it may be the most overlooked spot, and I may be sitting in the middle of nothing but a briar thicket, but if I can get 15 feet up in that briar thicket and I know deer's coming through it, trying to get away from other folks, I can't see near as much as I think I want to see, but if I think I'm in the right position, in the right place, it don't really matter what it looks like.
I got to ask, how did you gain confidence doing that? Because for somebody like me, if I pull up and I'm like, okay, this guy's parked right here, that guy's parked over there, he's probably walking to that saddle, this guy's probably going to that hub, I'm like, golly, man, this like, and I'm just going somewhere else. Like, how did you like develop the mindset where you're like, oh, I know, I'm gonna sit that rocky ditch coming out of the briar thicket 23 yards from the road, and that's where I'm gonna hunt. And you get up in the tree, you're like, yeah, this is it. Like, what's that mindset like?
At first, it was hard. It was always kicking myself, man, I'm doing the wrong thing. I need to get down. I need to be somewhere that's 2 miles away from any pressure, away from everybody. until I started seeing deer and started religiously seeing people bump deer past me, whether it's just does or small bucks, and seeing a trend of knowing kind of where people are going to those most obvious places that you can literally look at on X. You can say, hey, X, Y, and Z, somebody's going to be here, they're going to be there. And trying to put myself in a position to where I think any deer that's getting pushed from those folks, or even just a normal travel route, once I started seeing deer religiously getting bumped from other people, and you can see orange vest 600 yards through the ridge, two ridges over, and deer are running from that, coming straight by me, even if they're at 100 yards from me. Once I started seeing that over and over and watching deer come through and come by me from other hunting pressure, it started to build a lot of confidence. But for the first probably year, I was kicking myself thinking I needed to be somewhere else doing something different.
You know where this would work very good, Andrew? The
Where?
place that broke you for hunting public land in Alabama.
Golly, I don't want to go back there.
Dude, hey, listen, I've got the spot. We'll have to talk offline that, I think, Andrew, if you went down there or went to this piece of public and used your tactics, you probably would kill some really big deer.
Yeah.
But
real.
it broke Andrew because
It broke my spirit.
There's more hunt. I mean, it was the most.
Listen, I tried everything. I tried walking far. I tried staying next to the truck. I tried doing the overlook thing. And, man, it was like I made 5 hunts, like morning and evening for like a couple days. And I got walked in on every single hunt, dude. It was depressing.
Had one guy shoot a deer right out in front of him.
The first deer I thought I was going to get a crack at, somebody else shot when it was 120 yards in front of me. I was like, all right, I'm going home.
Yeah.
I'm good.
There's been many a lunchtime since I've been in the tree, and I'll talk to 2 or 3 different guys coming out of the woods around lunchtime, and it's, hey, how are you? You see anything? Well, yeah, you just pushed 4 or 5 deer past me. You have any luck? No, I didn't see anything back on the saddle. So having some of them conversations or meeting people back at the truck and talking to folks, it all kind of played a factor, but just gaining that confidence and knowing that eventually it started working and kind of learning how to do that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, listen, I think we'll wrap up with that. I definitely think we ought to, maybe after this season. Let me ask you, are you guys going to hunt Alabama again this year?
I am. Yeah, I'm coming.
Mid-January?
Yeah, probably mid-January. I don't know. We'll get back with you and let you know what dates we're going to be out there.
Okay.
Oh,
Cool.
man. Hey, we got a camp in early January. We'd like to have you fellas at if you can make it. So.
Dude, I missed a freaking giant deer in Alabama last year.
You didn't even miss. You arrow never made it to the deer.
Yeah, I centered a 4-inch sapling right in front of his vitals. And I mean, I had the deer it was crazy. I'll have to tell you guys the story later, but basically came into 10 yards right across a little creek, and I was underneath a big magnolia tree, and he's just looking at me like, what are you doing here? And he let me come to full draw and everything. I mean, gave me just a butter perfect shot, and I totally screwed up.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, real quick, guys, as a point of wrapping up here, talk about the YouTube channel and everything. If you guys want to kind of follow along with some of the hunts and everything y'all got going on, and
so
then
we did the Georgia Public Project, trying to get it growing. I've been working on it for probably 4 years now, and this year I feel like is going to be finally the year where I can get it to take off and actually start gaining some traction. So if you guys would go over there and subscribe to the YouTube, follow the Instagram page. We're trying to pump out some good content. Been pumping out a lot of videos this year. So I've got his big buck that he killed last Sunday is going to be coming up next. I just posted mine. And then our friend Mark killed a decent one in Kentucky that we just posted, and got a lot of cool footage from the Kentucky hunt. So go on there, watch that, and I try to keep a video at least maybe once every 2 weeks coming out right now. It's kind of what I'm trying to do. So hopefully keep that going.
Awesome. Well, Jonah, Andrew, thank y'all for joining us, dude. It's been a fun. I almost said a fun hunt. It's been a fun podcast. We still got a lot of season left. I know y'all are going to kind of extend your season hunting Alabama and everything, so that's going to be a good time. And hopefully, maybe y'all have some success in Alabama. That'd be pretty awesome to kind of do that. And then maybe that's the time we'll get you guys back on the podcast.
Yeah, we'll try to maybe do a deer camp or something down there. That'd be fun.
Absolutely, perfect. Well, listeners, appreciate y'all listening to the podcast. Viewers, thank y'all for watching the podcast on YouTube, and everybody appreciate y'all joining us and purchasing also Southern Outdoorsman hats. Been shipping out hats left and right. Appreciate all the support there. Like we had mentioned in past episodes, our new, as Andrew calls the chocolate chip hat, brown on brown patch hat, and then also the old school camo hat just came back in stock. So appreciate everybody purchasing all those. Appreciate y'all's support, and we appreciate y'all listening and watching. So we'll catch you back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And remember, y'all stay Southern.